Alec's heart urged his bay horse along the narrow trail, his gloved hands steady on the reins, his hat brim catching flecks of white. The world had grown quiet in that way it did before deep cold set in, when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He had planned to reach the river bend before nightfall, to check the line of fence that had been worrying him, but fate always found a way to intervene on the frontier. A sudden crack in the underbrush startled the horse, and Alex pulled it to a stop. Out of the scrub came a small figure, darting like a rabbit pursued by hounds. It was a girl, no older than 9, her bonnet askew, braids unraveling, face red with cold and panic. She stumbled onto the trail and nearly fell, then looked up at him with eyes too wide for such a young face. "Please, sir." Her voice was hoarse, desperate. "You got to come quick. Mama, she's hurt bad." Alex swung down from the saddle without hesitation. The urgency in the child's tone carved into him sharper than any knife. He knelt, bringing himself eye level with her, and laid a steady hand on her shoulder. "Where is she?" The girl pointed, her arm trembling, toward a collapsed barn that leaned like a broken rib against the slope beyond the trees. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. No sounds of livestock came from the pen beside it. Just stillness, as though life itself had been driven out. "She can't move," the girl said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "They left her there." Alex didn't ask who they were. He read the truth in her shaking hands and in the cracked laces of her boots. Without another word, he lifted her onto his horse and took the reins in one hand, striding quickly toward the broken structure. The barn door sagged from rusted hinges, groaning when he pushed it open. Inside, the air reeked of mildew, blood, and old hay turned sour. Light leaked through gaps in the roof, striping the dirt floor. Against the far wall lay a woman. She was thin, almost spectral, her dress torn and muddied, her scalp raw and bare where hair had been cruelly shorn away. Purple bruises bloomed across her cheekbones, her lips split and caked with dried blood. She shivered despite the threadbare blanket half draped over her. Still, she tried to raise herself when Alex stepped forward, as if instinct demanded she meet intrusion with defiance. Her voice rasped. "Take my girl away." The child slid from the horse's back and rushed to her, clutching her mother's hand with a sob. Alex crouched near them, feeling the weight of the cold air pressing against his lungs. The woman's eyes, dulled by pain, still carried a spark, a pride that even brutality had not managed to extinguish. "You'll freeze to death if you stay here," Alex said. His words were calm, low, but they filled the hollowed space with certainty. She flinched when he reached for her, though she lacked strength to resist. The girl looked between them, pleading silently. Alex gathered the woman in his arms with careful steadiness, lifting her as though she were both fragile glass and sacred burden. Her breath caught, a mixture of pain and humiliation, but she did not protest further. The child clung to his coat as he carried her mother outside. Snow swirled harder now, coating the abandoned wagon that lay tipped on its side near the barn. Traces of rope dangled from it, ugly reminders of how she had been discarded like cargo unfit for keeping. Alex's jaw hardened. He had seen cruelty on the frontier, neighbors turned savage when land or pride was at stake, but there was something in this act that went beyond mere harshness. To shear a woman bald and leave her to die was a violence that spoke of spite, not survival. He set her gently in the wagon bed he had brought, layering his own heavy coat over her shoulders. The girl nestled against her mother's side, eyes shut tight as if shutting out the memory of what had been done. Alex took the reins once more, climbing onto the driver's seat. The trail ahead wound through a valley already filling with white. Every hoofbeat thudded into snow, muffled and heavy. Alex kept his gaze sharp, scanning for riders, though the storm concealed all but the nearest trees. He could feel the woman's trembling through the wood of the wagon, each shudder echoing the truth of her suffering. Behind him, her voice, ragged but determined, broke the quiet. "Stranger, you'll bring trouble on yourself." Alex didn't turn. His breath rose like smoke into the air. A man who rides past trouble without stopping ain't worth much. No answer came, but he felt her gaze, heavy with disbelief, then softening into silence. They traveled until the horizon swallowed the barn completely. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of pine and the bite of ice. The girl fell asleep against her mother, exhaustion pulling her under. Alex tightened the blankets around them, one eye always on the shifting gray sky. As they crossed a ridge, he caught sight of a cluster of houses far off, smoke rising from chimneys. But the memory of the wagon abandoned in the snow told him enough. Townsfolk had chosen not to intervene. Rejection had been her only companion until now. The horse snorted, laboring against the cold. Alex guided them into a narrow hollow where fir trees broke the wind. The snow gathered deeper, catching on the brims of his boots and the wagon boards. He stopped just long enough to pour water for the horse and check the woman's pulse. Her eyes fluttered open, hazel flecked with gold, dulled by fever yet watchful. She tried to lift a hand to cover her scalp, but Alex gently caught her wrist. "Don't," he said softly. "Ain't nothing to be ashamed of." Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears welled and froze before they could fall. He released her hand and adjusted the blanket once more. His silence spoke more than pity ever could. Night threatened early in those October hills. The wind roared louder, rattling branches, and the wagon wheels crunched over hidden stones. Alex drove on, each mile a test of endurance. He could feel the choice pressing against him like the weight of the storm. He had taken them in, and now the world would not easily forgive it. Still, he rode. When the ridge opened to reveal the river valley, snow swept across the water in veils. The cabin he called home stood dark against the pale land, a squat silhouette of pine logs and stone chimney. Relief slid through him, though his face betrayed nothing. He guided the horse down the final slope, each step careful on ice-slick ground. At the cabin, he carried the woman inside, her body light yet unwieldy in her weakness. The girl stumbled after them, clutching the hem of his coat. The interior smelled of pine pitch and smoke. He laid the woman near the hearth, striking flint to coax flames from kindling. Fire caught quickly, throwing orange light across her hollowed cheeks and the lines of old pain etched deep despite her youth. The girl huddled close, warming her fingers, whispering to her mother that all would be well. Alex set broth to heat, the aroma of salted meat and onion filling the room. He worked with efficient quiet, as if silence itself could shield them. When he finally met the woman's eyes again, she whispered through cracked lips, "Why?" The question hung between them, fragile as icicles. Alex stirred the fire, its sparks rising like stars. Because no one else did. The storm clawed at the shutters, a beast of ice and wind that promised more nights of hardship. But inside the small cabin, warmth spread. Not safety, not yet, but a reprieve carved out against the world's cruelty. The girl, now dozing against her mother, murmured in sleep. The woman touched her child's hair with trembling fingers, then looked back at Alex. Something unspoken passed, not trust but the beginning of it, a thread thin as breath. Outside, the wind howled, and from far across the valley, faint as a shadow, came the echo of hoofbeats. The cabin groaned against the wind, its logs creaking as if the storm outside sought to pry them apart. Alex stoked the fire higher, feeding it split pine until the hearth glowed red and the shadows retreated to the corners of the room. The warmth filled the space with a soft hum, a barrier against the white roar beyond the shutters. He moved with the same quiet precision he had shown in carrying the woman here, as though every action must be performed with care, nothing wasted, nothing loud. The girl sat cross-legged near the hearth, her cheeks flushed by heat, eyes half closed from exhaustion yet still alert enough to watch over her mother. Ruth, he had not heard her name yet, but he would learn it soon enough, rested on a cot Alex had dragged close to the fire. She lay curled under wool blankets, her breath uneven but steadier than when he had first found her. Every so often, she tried to hide her bare scalp with the corner of the blanket, shame pricking her more sharply than cold. Alex noticed but never let his eyes linger. His respect was its own kind of medicine. He poured broth from the iron pot into a tin cup and knelt beside her. The steam curled upward, carrying the scent of salted beef, onion, and bay leaf. She turned her head away at first, lips pressed tight as though refusing sustenance was the only choice she still owned. But then her daughter's small hand urged the cup closer. Alex said nothing, only waited with patient steadiness until at last the woman accepted. She sipped, wincing as the heat touched her raw throat, then drank deeper. Her eyes shimmered faintly in the firelight, caught between gratitude and the humiliation of needing help. Better, Alex murmured when the cup was empty. Not a question, but an affirmation, a simple truth given voice. She nodded once, eyes lowered. The girl tugged at his sleeve. Sir, may I feed the horse? Her voice carried both timidity and eagerness, the blend of a child who had been taught to stay out of the way but longed for something to do. Alex studied her a moment, then reached for his coat and draped it across her shoulders. Bucket by the door. Pour the oats slow. Her face lit faintly, and she scampered off. The door opened, letting in a whip of snow and dark, then shut again, leaving Alex and the woman alone. Silence stretched, broken only by the pop of sap in the fire. She shifted under the blanket, her voice hoarse. You shouldn't have taken us in. Folks will talk. Alex leaned back on his heels, gaze steady as granite. Let 'em. Her lips parted, startled by the calm defiance in his tone. They'll say you've tied yourself to disgrace. I don't listen to cowards. He rose, placing the tin cup on the table. And I ain't letting a woman and her child freeze because of gossip. Something flickered across her face then, an ember of recognition, maybe even hope, but it vanished quickly, swallowed by weariness. She turned her face toward the fire, letting its light hide her expression. When the girl returned, laughing softly at how the horse had nudged her hand for more, Alex almost smiled. The sound of her laughter filled the cabin with a brightness that hadn't lived there in a long time. He set more wood on the fire, and the night wore on. Days followed, marked by snow piling higher against the cabin walls and by the rhythm of small, necessary tasks. Alex chopped wood outside, his axe echoing through the frozen air. Each strike was measured, the strength of a man who had built his life from hard labor. The girl would watch through the frosted window, her breath fogging the glass, sometimes daring to run out and fetch a smaller piece to carry back in. Inside, the woman healed slowly. Bruises faded to yellow and brown, her breathing eased, but her silence remained heavy. She sewed with clumsy hands by the fire, mended a torn sleeve of her daughter's dress, ground corn for bread, though every movement seemed haunted by fear of doing it wrong. When Alex entered with fresh wood or pelts from his trapline, she would glance up quickly, searching his face for judgment. She found none, only the steady presence of a man who neither pitied nor condemned. At meals, he passed her bread before serving himself. At night, he added wood to the fire without being asked. His gestures were simple, wordless, but each one carved away a little of the wall she had built around herself. One evening, a traveling peddler knocked at the door, snow clinging to his hat brim. He carried news from town, his tongue loose with gossip. They say Widow Turner's kin drove her out, he remarked while warming his hands by the fire. Claimed she'd gone mad. Shameful business, though folk reckoned she brought it on herself. His eyes darted toward the woman on the cot, who lowered her gaze and pulled the kerchief tighter around her head. Alex poured the man coffee and said evenly, Folks who reckon like that don't know a thing worth saying. The peddler blinked, taken aback by the steel in Alex's tone. He chuckled nervously and soon took his leave, muttering about the weather. The door shut, snow sweeping back into silence. The woman lifted her eyes then, wide and searching, as though she had not expected defense. Alex met her gaze only long enough to nod once, then returned to mending a harness strapped by lamplight. His quiet loyalty spoke louder than any grand declaration. Nights stretched long in the cabin. The wind rattled the shutters, coyotes yipped on distant ridges, and the girl sometimes woke from dreams crying out. Each time, her mother soothed her with whispered lullabies, though her voice broke often. Alex would sit awake near the hearth, watching the fire burn down, making sure the night held no threats. The glow traced his sharp features, the weathered plains of a man shaped by solitude yet softened now by duty not entirely his own. The shift came slowly, almost imperceptible. The woman began to stand more often, her strength returning. She helped knead dough, swept the cabin floor, even joined her daughter to scatter corn for the chickens. The kerchief still hid her head, but less tightly now, as if she no longer believed it defined her shame. One morning, as pale sun bled through the frosted window, she dropped a wooden spoon and winced, bracing for harsh words. None came. Alex only picked it up, placed it back in her hand, and said, Try again. His voice held no mockery, only the steady calm of a man who had made mistakes enough to know that trying mattered more than failing. Her throat tightened. She nodded, and for the first time, he saw her smile. Small, fragile, but real. The girl grew bolder too, her laughter becoming a daily presence. She perched on Alex's shoulders when chores allowed, squealing with delight as he carried her to the woodpile. She began to call him Mr. Hart, with a familiarity that suggested safety had finally taken root. Still, beneath the quiet routine, a shadow lingered. The woman often paused at the sound of distant hoofbeats, eyes darkening with fear. She never spoke of her in-laws, but the tension in her shoulders told the story. Alex noticed. He noticed everything. One night, when the storm raged hardest, she sat awake by the fire after the girl had fallen asleep. The flames painted her bare scalp in soft gold where the kerchief had slipped away. She caught Alex's gaze and quickly pulled it back into place, shame burning across her face. "You don't need to hide," he said quietly. Her hands froze on the fabric. "You don't understand. To them, I'm nothing now. Less than nothing." Alex leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "To me, you're a woman who survived." Her breath shuddered out, and she turned away, tears catching the light. The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. Later, as the girl stirred in her sleep, whispering her mother's name, Ruth, he finally heard it then, whispered through the child's dream, touched her daughter's cheek, then looked across the fire at Alex. Her eyes held gratitude, fear, and something deeper that she herself might not yet have recognized. "You don't have to risk yourself for us," she murmured. "They'll come." Alex rose, laying another log on the flames. He stood with his back to her, broad shoulders outlined in firelight, and said with quiet certainty, "I ain't leaving you." The words struck the room like a promise bound by iron. Ruth closed her eyes, the tension in her shoulders loosening though fear still hovered. She drew the blanket tighter, whispering into the dark, "Then God help you." Outside, the storm broke for a moment, revealing a moon sharp as a blade through torn clouds. From far across the valley, a single wolf's cry pierced the silence, long and haunting, as though carrying a warning meant only for them. The days shortened until twilight seemed to arrive by mid-afternoon, and the valley lay buried under drifts that reached the knees of Alex's horse. Smoke curled steady from the chimney, a lifeline against the cold. Within the cabin, warmth and routine stitched together the hours, though tension lingered like a shadow across every quiet task. Ruth had grown stronger, her cheeks carried color again, her movements no longer trembled with each effort. Yet behind her recovery, Alex could see the constant fear, the way her eyes darted to the door whenever a branch cracked outside, as if expecting her tormentors to appear at any moment. It was on a morning when the sky was a pewter dome and frost webbed the inside of the windows that Ruth's story began to slip free. Alex had been repairing a saddle strap at the table, his broad hands working with steady patience, when he heard her speaking softly to her daughter. The girl was perched on a stool, watching her mother braid a strip of cloth to serve as a makeshift doll's hair. "They can't hurt us here," Ruth whispered, though her voice carried a tremor. "Not while we stay with him." The words fell into the room like a confession. Alex didn't raise his head, but he listened, each syllable pulling more weight than hammer blows. Ruth's gaze flicked toward him, then away, and she seemed to understand that silence could no longer shield the truth. "They called me cursed," she said at last, her voice louder now though still fragile. "Said I failed as a wife when the baby didn't live past her first winter. My husband had been dead near a year then. His kin took us in, or so they claimed. But all they gave was cruelty. They said a woman who couldn't keep a child alive had no worth, and when I tried to leave with Anna, they dragged us back." Her hand tightened on the fabric braid until her knuckles whitened. "That's when they sheared me. Said no man would ever look at me again." The fire cracked sharply in the hearth, as though it bore witness. Alex set down the strap and regarded her. The flames painted her bare scalp in bronze where the kerchief had slipped, and she did not move to cover it this time. Her shoulders rose and fell, each breath steeped in old humiliation. "Anna cried for them to stop," Ruth continued, her voice breaking. "They laughed at her tears. When I wouldn't beg, they called me stone-hearted. Then they left us in that barn to freeze. They thought no one would care enough to come." Alex's jaw flexed, the muscle in his cheek tight. He wanted to speak, to tell her she had more strength than any of those men could fathom, but words seemed too thin beside her suffering. Instead, he rose and set another log on the fire, letting the act itself answer. Anna leaned against her mother, eyes wide, innocence still intact though bruised by the memory. Ruth wrapped an arm around the girl, pressing her close, and for the first time since coming to his cabin, she met Alex's eyes without flinching. Something passed there, fragile as thawing ice yet unyielding, acknowledgment, and perhaps the seed of trust. In the days that followed, the air between them shifted. Ruth no longer avoided his gaze. When she baked bread, she offered him the first slice without hesitation. When she drew water from the well, she allowed Anna to run to him with a bucket, laughing at how the child insisted she had carried it all alone. Alex answered only with small nods, yet those gestures carried weight, each one building a bridge across the silence that had once kept them apart. Still, the world beyond their valley had not forgotten. It was a week later when warning arrived. Alex had been splitting logs at the edge of the clearing, his breath a mist in the frozen air, when a rider approached from the south trail. The man was wiry, bundled in a patched coat, his horse lathered from the climb. Alex recognized him as Calvin Price, a ranch hand who drifted between outfits, carrying tidings in exchange for food or coin. Price dismounted stiffly, stamping his boots. "Hart," he said, his eyes wary, "words all over town. Folks know you took Widow Turner in. Her husband's kin are riled. They say she's theirs by right and that you're keeping her against their will." Alex set down the axe with deliberate calm. "She's free. No man owns her." Price glanced toward the cabin, where smoke curled steady, and lowered his voice. "That may be, but they ain't the type to argue law. They mean to come. I heard him drinking on it at the saloon. Said they'd drag her back, show the valley no man can steal from them." Alex's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed even. "Let them try." Price shifted uneasily, then muttered, "Best be ready," before swinging back into the saddle and riding off into the gray. Alex watched him vanish into the trees, then turned toward the cabin. Through the frosted window, he saw Ruth watching, her hand pressed against the glass, her expression tight with dread. That evening, the air inside carried a heaviness, as though every word spoken might draw fire. Ruth busied herself kneading dough, though her hands shook. Anna hummed softly while arranging her cloth doll on the hearthstones, unaware of the storm gathering beyond childhood's edge. "They'll come," Ruth whispered finally, her voice brittle as thin ice. "You should send us away before it's too late." Alex looked at her from across the table, his features carved by firelight. "There's no place for you to go. And I don't run from men who think cruelty is their right." Her eyes glistened. "You don't understand. They won't stop. They'll burn this place, kill to prove their pride." He rose, crossing the room with quiet steps. His shadow fell across her as he spoke, low and certain. "Then I'll stand. And if I fall, I'll fall knowing I didn't hand you back to wolves." Tears slid down her face, silent but fierce. "Why would you risk everything for me? For a woman everyone rejects." Alex studied her for a long moment, then answered in the plain truth of his heart. "Because you're worth more than they ever saw. And because your little girl deserves to see one man in this world stand up for her mama." The words broke something open inside her. She turned away, shoulders shaking, but it was not despair this time. It was release, the first crack in a wall built from years of cruelty. Anna climbed into her lap, wrapping small arms around her neck, and Ruth held her tightly, burying her face in her daughter's hair. From that night forward, the cabin's silence carried a different weight. It was no longer the hush of strangers, but the pause of people bound by shared purpose. Alex repaired his rifle by lamplight, cleaned his revolver, and stacked wood high against the wall. Ruth, though fearful, began to help in the preparations, filling jars with broth, sewing patches into warm coats, guiding Anna in simple chores. Each act of readiness became an act of defiance. One evening, while Alex sharpened his knife at the table, Ruth spoke quietly across the glow. "If they come, and I fall, promise me you'll keep Anna safe." Alex looked up sharply. "You'll not fall. You can't promise that." His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "Then hear this instead. If they come, they'll find me standing in their way. And if they pass me, then they'll face you not alone, but as my wife." The room stilled, the fire popping softly. Ruth's breath caught, her lips parting in shock. "Wife." Alex set down the knife. "I'll marry you. Not tomorrow, not with words shouted in town. But here, before God, if that's what it takes to put an end to their claim. They can call you mine, and no man will dare call you less." Her hands trembled, pressing against her chest as though to steady the storm inside. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then tears welled again, but this time her eyes held a fragile light. "You'd do that? For me?" "For you," Alex said. "And for her." He glanced toward Anna, who had fallen asleep by the fire, her doll clutched tight. The silence that followed carried a warmth stronger than the flames, though fear still lingered at the edges. Ruth drew the kerchief from her head, fingers slow, and let it fall into her lap. She met his eyes bare for the first time, scarred and stripped yet unashamed. Alex did not flinch, did not look away. His gaze was steady, reverent even, and in that moment she saw what her in-laws never had, recognition of her dignity. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant roll of thunder though the sky was clear. Ruth turned toward the sound, heart tightening. She whispered, "They're coming." Dawn bled slowly across the valley, painting the snowfields in pale lavender before the sun rose. The storm of the night had broken, leaving the land hushed, a silence so deep it pressed against the ears. Alex stood on the porch with his rifle cradled against one arm, his breath clouding in the cold. Every muscle in his body was taut, the stillness of a man who had already accepted that this day would ask more of him than most days combined. Behind him, faint movements stirred in the cabin. Ruth had been awake most of the night, whispering prayers while Anna slept pressed against her side. When Alex entered, stamping frost from his boots, he found her standing by the hearth with the child in her arms, her eyes searching his face as though trying to read the future written there. "They're near, aren't they?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of certainty. Alex nodded once, setting his rifle on the table. "Hoofbeats carry in snow. Won't be long now." She tightened her hold on Anna, who shifted sleepily and clung to her mother's neck. The kerchief that usually hid Ruth's scalp lay discarded on the table. She had chosen not to wear it this morning. Her head was bare, the scars of her shame laid open, but her eyes no longer held only fear. They held fire. "Go inside the back room when they come," Alex told her. "Bar the door and keep the girl behind you." Her chin lifted, thin but unyielding. "No. If I hide, they'll say I'm beaten still. I'll stand." He studied her, the determination carved into her expression, and after a long silence he gave a small nod. "Then stand with me." The first echo of riders reached them as the sun's rim broke over the ridge. The sound rolled through the hollow like thunder on the horizon, steady and sure. Alex lifted his rifle, checked the chamber, and stepped back out onto the porch. The cold bit at his cheeks, but the heat of resolve inside him burned hotter than the fire on the hearth. Through the drifting light, a line of horsemen appeared. 4 men, hard-faced and wrapped in coats dark against the snow. Ruth recognized them instantly, her breath catching in her throat. She gripped Anna's hand tight enough to leave marks, but the girl did not protest. The child sensed the storm about to break. The men reined their horses at the edge of the clearing, snow spraying under the hooves. The one in front, tall with a scar splitting his cheek, leaned forward in the saddle. His voice carried sharp and cold. "Hart, you've got what's ours. Hand her over, and we'll be done with it." Alex stood on the porch, rifle steady in his hands. His voice, when it came, was low but carried easily across the snow. "She's no man's property. She stays." The leader spat into the snow, his sneer twisted. "You think you can keep her? She's disgraced, worthless. You'll find no honor protecting a barren widow shaved like a dog." Ruth flinched, but she did not lower her gaze. She stepped forward until she stood in the doorway, the firelight framing her, her bare scalp gleaming against the pale morning. Her voice trembled but did not break. I will not go back to you. You can kill me here, but I will not return." The men laughed harshly, the sound cutting through the cold. The leader's eyes hardened. "Then you've chosen your grave." Alex lifted the rifle to his shoulder in one fluid motion. The laugh died instantly. His finger hovered on the trigger, and his eyes, gray, steady, unyielding, locked on the man's heart. "You take one step closer, and you'll never ride again." For a long breath, no one moved. The horses snorted, pawing at the snow, restless under the tension. Then one of the men spurred forward, rage twisting his face. Alex fired. The shot cracked through the valley, echoing against the ridge. Snow burst near the man's horse's hooves, throwing up a spray of ice. The beast reared, screaming, and nearly threw its rider. He pulled back, cursing, while the others shouted in anger. The leader snarled, "You won't scare us with warning shots. We'll burn you out." He swung his arm, and another man pulled a torch from his saddlebag, striking flint until a flame licked to life despite the cold. He drove his horse toward the barn. Alex moved fast, leaping from the porch into the snow. The cold bit into his boots, but he did not feel it. He fired again, the ball ripping through the torch before it touched wood. Flames scattered, hissing into the snow. The man shouted, wheeled back, and the others cursed. Ruth had stepped fully into the doorway now. Anna clutched behind her. The child's eyes were wide, but she did not cry. She looked at Alex with a strange, quiet awe. Ruth's voice rang out, sharper than Alex had ever heard it. "You will not take me again. Not while he stands, and not while I breathe." The leader's face twisted with fury. He drew his revolver and raised it, aiming at Alex. Time seemed to slow. The click of the hammer cut the silence like a blade. Alex dove sideways, rolling into the snow. The shot cracked, splintering the porch rail. He came up on one knee, rifle snapping to his shoulder. His ball struck the leader's revolver, shattering the barrel from his hand. The weapon clattered uselessly into the snow. The horses screamed, stamping wildly. Snow whipped up in clouds as the wind surged, the storm gathering strength again as if the land itself had risen in defiance. White gusts tore across the clearing, blinding, shrieking through the trees. The men cursed, their eyes stinging, their coats whipped by the gale. "Fall back!" one shouted, though pride held them a moment longer. The leader clutched his ruined hand, eyes blazing with hatred, but the storm was too strong. It drove into their faces, forced their horses sideways, smothered every attempt at advance. They pulled back at last, cursing Alex's name, their silhouettes fading into the white veil of snow. The storm swallowed them whole, their hoofbeats dwindling until silence returned, broken only by the howl of the wind. Alex lowered his rifle slowly, chest heaving with steady breaths. Snow clung to his beard, his coat, but his eyes were clear. He turned back toward the cabin. Ruth still stood in the doorway, Anna pressed against her side. Her face was streaked with tears, but her chin was high, her gaze unbroken. She stepped down into the snow, crossing to him with deliberate steps. "They'll come again," she whispered. Alex shook his head. "Not soon. They'll lick their wounds before they try again. And next time, they'll know this place isn't weak." Her hands trembled as she reached for him, fingers brushing his sleeve. "You stood for me when no one else ever would." He looked down at her, the firelight from the cabin behind her, the storm's fury swirling around them both. "I told you. I ain't leaving you." Anna slipped free from her mother's hold and ran to Alex, wrapping her small arms around his leg. Her voice was muffled against his coat. "Don't let them take Mama away." Alex bent, resting a hand on the girl's shoulder, his eyes meeting Ruth's above her head. "They won't. Not while I draw breath." The storm raged for hours, sealing the valley in white. Inside the cabin, the fire roared, warming the three who sat close together. Ruth's hand found Alex's as Anna drifted to sleep in her lap. Her grip was hesitant, trembling, but she did not pull away when he closed his hand around hers. Later, when the child slept and the fire burned low, Ruth spoke softly, almost as if to herself. "If you still mean to marry me, know this, I have nothing but my name, and even that they tried to strip from me." Alex studied her face, the strength that had risen from ruin, and answered in the same steady tone he had carried since the day he found her. "Then we'll build the rest together. From nothing, from snow, from whatever God gives us. They took your pride. I'll see it given back." Tears welled again, but this time she let them fall freely. She leaned her head against his shoulder, bare scalp pressing into the rough wool of his coat. For the first time, she allowed herself to rest without fear. Outside, the wind began to ease, stars pricking the sky above the storm's retreat. The valley lay silent, blanketed in white, untouched and new. By morning, the world glowed bright beneath the risen sun. Smoke curled from the chimney, and footprints led from porch to barn and back, the paths of a family forging life from winter's grip. Ruth stepped onto the porch with Alex beside her, Anna clutching her skirt. She looked out across the snowfields, her scars bared to the day, and for once she did not shrink from the light. The land was still harsh, the threats not gone, but something had shifted. She was no longer the woman left to die in a barn. She was the woman who had stood in the doorway, who had faced her tormentors with her head uncovered, who had found a man unafraid to tie his fate to hers. Alex placed a hand at her back, steady, grounding. She turned her face toward him, the winter sun catching her tears, and whispered, "Then let it be so." The words lingered in the frosted air like a vow, as binding as any spoken before a preacher. Anna laughed, the sound clear as bells, and the valley seemed to echo it back. Yet far beyond the ridge, where the storm had driven them, her in-laws gathered around their wounded pride, nursing hatred like a fire banked under ash. And though the snow had bought time, Ruth knew the battle was not over. She looked out across the white horizon, her hand tightening in Alex's, and said in a voice barely above a breath, "This isn't finished."